We're recording.
All right, Volley Chief fans, this is my first collaboration. So I'm here with Eugene Driscoll of the Valley Independent Sentinel. It's our local newspaper now in the Valley area, obviously. Been in business for how long now?
Since 2009 somehow.
Wow, it's been
That's
that
ancient.
long.
Yeah, in internet years, because we're an online newspaper. That's ancient.
Yeah, and Eugene, I asked him, like, let's get together on this. Obviously, I have a soft spot for journalism and my background with my grandfather being a reporter from 1939 to 2010. So I said to Eugene, like, let's collaborate. Let's talk about this. And especially because it's such one of the landmark events to take place in the Valley. And, Eugene, you're from from New York, but you have a background in journalism, but you also have some law enforcement in your background. So, these
father
things
and a brother. Yes.
Yeah. This stuff interests you too, just like me. And I think, for history's sake, it's good that we team up on this.
Yeah, I was thinking about that today because, as newspapers shrink and the media shrinks and the type of local coverage that I do goes by the wayside, it's clearly on the way out. I was thinking, well, how do you justify covering a tragedy? But I do think, like you said, it's educational. As a new resident of Derby, I mean, I've been here 20 years and that's new. But through you and through your father and your brother and your mom, learning the history of Derby, learning the history of the community I moved to is important. And this is, a landmark thing that happened in the city of Derby.
Yeah, and you look back, right, I'd say like the post-World War II era, you kind of have in Derby really like 3 or 4 major events that have, really, it's a lot of people judge things before and after those events. So, the 1955 floods, probably the first, large-scale modern disaster to hit the Valley. And then from there, I'll throw it in because even though technically it was in Shelton, but it was close enough, the BF Goodrich explosion.
Mm-hmm.
Right after that, you had the whole dye fire. And then shortly after that, you had the River Restaurant explosion. So you kind of have, moving into more modern times, you had the terrible fire on Caroline Street in the 90s. Obviously, the turn of the century, we had the anthrax attacks, take place in our backyard. And then I hate to say the last one would kind of be the last latex foam fire in May of 2001 in Ansonia.
Okay.
And a lot of those are kind of like, the major events that people talk about still to this day. Especially in Derby.
Right. And one thing I was thinking the same thing. The thing that strikes me as different, right? As the outsider looking in, we live now in this age of social media, and I was struck by. I mean, I knew the River Restaurant was a restaurant that exploded. Firefighters would talk about it. I would hear it in passing even before the Valley Indy launched. I would be in various places and hear about it. But then each year, you would send me a note reminding me, hey, this happened, and I would try to put something together quickly or some type of link to an old article. I've done a couple of retrospectives over the years. The amount in social media, I'm trying to make a point about social media. As bad as social media is, some of the people that were lost in that tragedy, their relatives are still very much here. They're online. Absolutely. They read and react. I was shocked by the amount of comments that people had personal experiences with this tragedy here in Derby. So in that respect, social media can still hold the community together. And I think it also is reflective on the type of community Derby is. Like, I don't know the Derby of 1985. I've heard about it, but I never experienced that Derby.
There was a lot of Trans Ams and hair. I can tell you that much.
Well, that I'm familiar with. But just the fact that, this was something that happened, it mattered. And they say never talk about anybody behind their back in the lower Naugatuck Valley. The other thing is, that's very much true. The other thing is, you have to treat people, events, and history with respect, because the remnants of it are still here. We're still directly connected to the people that were lost that day.
Correct. Absolutely. And the with my podcast and with starting it, I wanted to tell this story because from the fire service side of things, the rescue effort that was mounted in those days was incredible. And like I think now, if God forbid an incident like that happened, how would we respond? And we've been trained, right? We have much better equipment, much better training. A lot of that was made up on the fly that day.
Mm.
And I really think that, telling the story from the side of the first responders is, kind of obviously what I do and with my my podcast. So this is really the first of several episodes that we're going to focus on. Today we wanted to talk a little bit about the background, the history of the event, and then I'm actually going to sit down and do some in-depth interviews with some of the first responders that responded that day. And the rescue of Michael Ippolito and how the firefighters of the Valley came together and were able to pull that off is just an incredible act of heroism. That and as much as in our profession, it's all in the line of work. It's that was an extraordinary event that required extraordinary people at the right moment to come together, and that's what you get. And that's one of the benefits of the Valley is that when something goes wrong, there's no better place to be because the community rallies. And I joke, I tell people, look, the Valley, it's like a dysfunctional family. We'll fight amongst each other all day, but don't start a fight with one of us because you're dealing with the rest of us.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
No, go.
Well, I was going to say you shared a video with me that was taken from the scene, and it's moments after the explosion happened, or so I don't know the exact amount of time, but it's pretty much it's as the firefighters are responding, and you see the response from people on the street. People are going towards this thing.
Correct.
And so what you said is literally in this video.
Right. So the I guess too we should probably just lay out for the younger audience it was December 1985 would be the date that we're talking about. It'd be the 38th anniversary coming up in a few days of the event. And there's a couple things that I wanted to background on because, for the interest of understanding the event and understanding how it happened, you should have in your cadre of stuff I sent you what looks like a top map, an older map showing the.
I do have two maps. There's this one.
Nope, the one before that. Okay, so what you're looking at here is the intersection of Main and Caroline Streets, and what the building that would be turned into the River Restaurant is the 172 to 164 block. You'll see it says 2B Saloon and then Barber, and these are taken off of what's called the Sanborn fire maps for history nerds like myself. If you want to get lost in a document online, Google Sanborn fire maps. And what they were maps from the insurance companies. So the event of a conflagration, they knew who to pay and how much to pay. So even if you look at this small section here, you'll see there's an undertaker, there's a laundry, there's a barber, and then you'll see some of the manufacturing. FA box is a fire alarm box. It's giving you information about the buildings. But what the reason why I wanted to show you this is you see the waterway, right, where it says race on that.
Okay, I didn't know what that was. Okay.
Right, so that's part of the aqueduct system that was put in to help move goods. So if you look at the factory that's kind of cut off there, you see the office of the factory. The pinkish shaded buildings are more industrial, and the yellow buildings are more commercial back then. Okay. So you're looking at what was part of that aqueduct system, and it would go across Caroline Street. And now when we just knocked down the buildings between Caroline and Factory Street, that was in the news, right? There was more of that where you could see the archways.
There they were,
this
back to like the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, this part of the aqueduct would be covered pretty quickly, so it wasn't around as long as the section across the street. So I believe this map, Eugene, do you know what the title is? Because it should be the year that it was produced.
I didn't realize that. I'm a moron. But yeah, this is 1898. Yes. That's okay, what that number
this
says.
Is 1898. So you see that waterway is there. If you transition to the next map, right, you'll see now there's the barber, the tailor, the saloon, and the waterway is gone. So in the what year is this one?
1912.
All right. So in the 14 years between that last map and this map, you'll see that the waterway was covered up, and it would make the basement of the river restaurant. Right. And that becomes important because the leak would occur in Caroline Street, and the gas would seep its way across and fill the basement.
That's where it pooled, and this was it was a ginormous basement, dude. This was
right.
And
that's where the catalyst of this entire disaster starts. So it's kind of amazing to think that you could pull a map from well over 100 years ago and see the beginnings of this there, and how over time the building would be repurposed. Now the original River Restaurant. Now I obviously was not here for this part. But at the time when the explosion happened in 1985, it had been in business, the river, for well over 50 years. Prior to its location at Main and Caroline, it was on Main Street, just north of the Derby-Shelton Bridge. So I was looking for a picture. I know there's a few out there, but there used to be a cluster of buildings. Like for us younger people, imagine there was still blocks of buildings on the far side of Route 34 hanging over the river. And hence the name River Restaurant. It was there. And the Ippolito family, started it and ran it. And then about 10 years before the disaster, they moved to the Caroline Street, Main Street location. Those buildings were knocked down. And that's another thing that I find very, very fascinating is that most of us in our the younger generations, we know downtown Derby as like a desolate wasteland, right? In 1985, it was the thriving downtown of a city. Every storefront, there were still buildings on both sides of the road. The whole area down behind Caroline Street was still, industrial, commercial. All those businesses were occupied and running. People were living in all the apartments above. So it's not like, nowadays you go down there and you kind of have a hard time visualizing.
Yes.
But that was in like you said, we have the video. I call it the Calvert video. It's because it was shot by Mr. Calvert of Calvert.
I learned that today. I had no idea. Yeah, he appears in a news report.
So it's amazing because in that day and age, to have somebody with a video camera right there on the spot. Nowadays, obviously, we know if anything happens, you could go on, YouTube it, and you'll find 400 angles. But to find that video that quick, so that you could see though that downtown, there's still a lot of people walking around in suits. All those, there was travel agencies, there was jewelry stores. Again, Calvert was still there. The Nutty Company, the Derby Pizza House. I think if I remember correctly, it was Club Soda was the bar, that used to be down there, and all those businesses were up. The billiard hall, Vanetti's, Derby Jewelers, the Bridge Smoke Shop. They were all up and running and full of people. So the event, as we said, December 6, 1985. A couple weeks earlier, the city started a project to separate the storm and sanitary sewer systems, and that's where they obviously, in the course of moving all the earth, they cracked a cast iron gas pipe.
I did read. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I read this, the National Transportation Safety Board report on this accident, and it's a fascinating read because they had to do an investigation because they had to determine, well, was this a gas leak that had been going on for a while, or was it something immediate? And it came down to, exactly what you're saying. They had just put in a new sewer pipe, and they did some backfill, and there were stones in the backfill. There wasn't supposed to be, according to the NTSB, any stones in that backfill, and they hit up what they backfilled it, and then a machine operator is condensing it. He's stomping it down literally with machinery, and that put pressure on the rocks, cracked the pipe, and then they determined that it had to happen within a few hours. It hadn't been something that was leaking for hours and hours and hours.
Right, and if you look, if you read that report, and that's an incredible report, there's a couple good reports that you could find relatively easy. There's that one. There's the National Fire Protection Association report, and they talk about that there was throughout the days prior, there was a constant odor of gas. As a matter of fact, in Mr. Calvert's video, I don't know if you watch it with the sound on, like almost immediately he's outside talking to people, and they're all talking about how they've been smelling gas.
I could smell it. Yeah.
And again, you transform that in the modern times. At the time, I think the Derby Fire Department probably had 1 or 2 combustible gas detectors. Every apparatus carries one now. They're 10 times more sensitive. They're much more technology. You compare the differences in time and how we would respond. That's what you think of in my line of work, is what would we do now if we went to something like that? But they had been going out several days, and even the day of, there was a call to the gas company too. A gas company worker and a supervisor came out, and they couldn't determine anything. But even the owner, Mr. Ippolito, they reported, smelling gas all day. Everybody it was a thing. Oh, we just smelled it. And then at 3:55 roughly p.m. is when the explosion happened.
And I was reading again in that report, one of the things that the investigators said from the feds,
right,
was that some of the earlier reports, this specific report earlier in the day, could have been sewage. It could have been sewage gas, because before they broke the pipe, they broke a sewage pipe, and that was leaking.
Right. So, the restaurant exploded. Now, from my standpoint, I was about 8 years old when this happened. And as you know, growing up in the fire service, we were actually playing football in the backyard on Hawthorne Ave. And, we heard the explosion, and you saw like a smoke cloud coming up over, the downtown area. But the thing that stirred my brother and I to start running was it immediately tripped the fire alarm box. So again, different time periods. We didn't have cell phones, so telegraph fire alarm boxes were still in use and still a thing. And the force of the explosion tripped the box across the street on the telephone pole.
Oh, wow.
So as soon as the boom happened, the fire horn started, and we, again, we were young kids. We were 8-9-year-old brothers who were involved in, my dad at the time was the chief of the ambulance corps. My grandfather was the fire commissioner in Derby. So we ran inside to try to get mom to find out what was going on. I could remember hearing my father talking on the radio, because he was actually leaving a call at Griffin Hospital, and he was in our ambulance when it happened. And we went down to the scene like we did when we were kids with every disaster or fire in the valley. Ironically, my grandfather was on assignment in Atlanta for the Evening Sentinel.
Oh, no kidding.
So yeah, so he didn't return home till the next morning. He was able to get a flight home. But that's kind of my memory of it. I could remember, walking up and seeing, but obviously we were kids. I have a very fuzzy memory of it. But a lot of the guys from the fire department, they really, obviously an incident like this is seared into your mind.
Because the people, and that restaurant, you've been in there.
That's the hard part, is that, the advantage of a small town is everybody knows everybody. The disadvantage of the small town is that everybody knows everybody. And there's, members of the Storms, Mrs. Pogozowski, who passed away in it, her son belonged to the Storms. So the guys from the fire department were, literally responding and digging to one of their own's mother that they knew was in the building. So it adds a whole nother layer onto what you go through in a situation like that, because the personal connection is so much. You're not at an incident. The River Restaurant was one of the most popular restaurants in Derby, and it was where everyone went on a Friday night, and everyone knows that there was a big dinner party planned there that night with about 100 people expected to attend. It's just.
One of our readers with that the restaurant, or the Christmas party that I guess was going to happen.
Yeah.
When I did something years ago, someone said it was Team Inc. specifically. I don't know if that's true. That was somebody who said he had worked for Team at the time, and they were the ones that were supposed to be in there. And that's the agency that's based on Elizabeth Street in Derby. So just throwing that out there as random.
And I just it's just another layer of the onion, if you will, that everybody responding there knew everybody working there, right? It's small town.
And to this day, like, again, as an outsider, I look at some of the last names of the victims. those are names that are still prominent today in Ansonia and Derby. So I can't even imagine what it was like to actually be there and to be trying to save, people from the community.
Right. And, initially they were able to make some surface, nowadays we call it surface victim, rescues, where they were able to pull some people out. And then as they arrived on scene, they started working. From what, being told, they heard just a blood curdling scream. And that's when they determined that the owner's son, Michael Ippolito, was trapped in the rubble. And that led them to begin, this massive rescue effort. And every one of the first responders, every one of the guys that I've talked to, they say that his yelling for help, his screaming is one of the things that they won't forget. And that kind of kept them going to be able to effect that rescue.
And Dave, was the gas, it hadn't been turned off by that point, right? There was still
and again, other layers.
I never knew this until today.
Yeah, the gas hadn't been turned off. At one point, they started getting gas readings in the sewers in the neighborhood. They actually had to evacuate. Again, that whole downtown being a thriving neighborhood, they actually had to evacuate and set up a shelter at Irving School. And a 100 or so people were displaced from the downtown area and moved to Irving School.
And I did see that some of the victims and the people, that they all lived right there. It wasn't like it was a different Derby, where the shop owner lives on Minerva Street. And the danger, I just never, like, where I was reading that it was 100% levels of gas in the sewers going out blocks. I mean, the danger that was still underway, like while this was happening and while they're trying to rescue people, is mind-boggling. That was new info for me.
It is. And, fortunately, in a way, we were able to have such good, documentation on the event. So you could still, read it. You could still learn from it. We could still use it for training. Well, I mentioned those other reports. The video from Mr. Calver is just incredible when you watch the entirety of it. And it is, I'm looking forward to getting the story out there. And I think the other thing it does is it keeps the memory of the victims, still in our hearts, still in the community. And, we always say when something happens, never forget, never forget. And I think it's important that you do stuff like this for that exact reason. And like you said, a lot of those families are still well established in the Valley. And I think in a way it's good for them to know that we haven't forgotten about them.
I agree 100%. And your father, I think, has posted YouTube videos going back probably a decade, some of which are connected to this. And there's one he posted, I watched half of it today, where it was, I think he calls it the River Restaurant Story. And it's a news report. I'm not even sure if the station is still around, but it goes through for a good 20 minutes. At the scene, because it was a report done after the fact. Then it interviews some of the survivors of the people who, the family members of people who lost their lives. And yeah, it's tough to, as an outsider, as a stranger, it's tough to watch. I mean, it's definitely heart-wrenching. So, and again, as a Derby resident, I wouldn't know this if it wasn't for people like you, your family, and the people in Derby who make it a point to remember this stuff.
Yeah, I and I think it's something too. I would like to at some point, hopefully, when a couple weeks go by, maybe even approach the city now that the sidewalk is complete there, and that the construction in the area is kind of done. I mean, maybe it is time we talk to the city fathers and the about putting something there, a little memorial. That I know that the Historical Society now, they're putting the plaques on the buildings, and it might be time for a little monument, something little to be affixed at the site, commemorating it.
Yeah, I would think the city would do that quickly.
Right. It shouldn't
asked,
Yeah, it shouldn't be a difficult thing, because it did. It transformed downtown Derby. It definitely affected and touched, the lives of. So, obviously, in addition to the Derby Fire Police and the Storm Ambulance Corps, Seymour, Shelton, Ansonia, Beacon Falls, Bethany, the New Haven Fire Department was heavily involved in this with, Chief Grant and the relationship that he had with the Derby Fire Department. it wasn't just, like I said, it was a lot of communities around that responded. Sikorsky aircraft, a mass casualty vehicle. I believe I sent you a map of the scene. Did I send you that one? There should be a map of.
If you sent it, I did not upload that one.
It was a map of the scene that was drawn out of where all the fire apparatus was parked, and it just gives you a list. The VEMS paramedics were there. Other things, the Griffin Hospital, differences in the way that hospitals respond to emergencies nowadays. Griffin Hospital went into the disaster plan, and you look back at all that was very big in the years ago. They did a lot of disaster drilling, and they had like annual disaster drills in the valley. And I remember, with my grandfather, my parents, my father, my brother and I would be involved in them a lot as a victim. We were a couple kids, there was bus crashes, and they had done a lot of that training of, large scale disasters. And if you listen to the radio traffic of that day, it's everybody calling everyone to implement the disaster plans. And they had, their plans. You'll listen right away. You'll hear the ambulances arrive on scene and say, this is it. Implement our disaster plan. One of the recordings, Artie Fredericks, was working the desk at the time in the police station, he called right away down to New Haven to the regional dispatch area and said, look, we just had the River Restaurant explode. You have to implement our disaster plan. And you hear them immediately calling Griffin Hospital saying, hey, something just blew up in downtown Derby. There's a lot of casualties coming your way. Start your disaster plans. And I mean, you're talking within minutes of it happening. This was set into motion. And that's what over the next, several episodes of the podcast, we're going to sit down and interview some of those members that responded and took part of this.
And an explosion, sometimes as just a local reporter, we're a little liberal with the word explosion, but this was a true.
Yeah, it leveled the building. The rear of the building kind of collapsed down. The front of the building maintained. If you look at early pictures of the incident, you could still see like the front facade, but over time it would kind of settle down a little bit. And again, besides the explosion, the gas problem, you had the fire, raging from within the rubble that started. And it was, again, just a Herculean effort to pull off what a lot of those guys pulled off.
Mini explosions were still happening. There were pockets of gas. I was just reading an account where I think it was it Chief Butler at the time?
Yeah, at the time, the fire chief was Jim Butler,
who passed away 2 years ago.
Yeah, the assistant chiefs were Charlie Stanky III, Chuck Stanky III, and then Phil Hawks and Ron Kumo were the fire chiefs at the time.
All people that are still around. That's amazing.
Still around, like we said. Yeah, a lot of them are.
And still involved in the fire service.
Right, in the Valley and the fire service, those are like when you say to someone, well, when did you join? And they'll say like right before BF, right after BF, right before the river, right after the river. Like that's kind of those are the separations of years in the department.
So they were trying to get to free Mr. Ippolito, and they dug a hole, and I guess there was a contractor who was doing work on the highway or something. He came down, they're clearing out debris. There was a little mini explosion, filled the hole back in, apparently. Just insane. So yeah, I have videos. If you, I do have the video you sent me from that. I guess was Mr. Calvert. I have your father's page where he had the Channel 2 news report, which is short and amazing. So let me know if you want to.
Yeah, no, we can post those up on the social media sites when we do that. I just wanted to include them. I didn't know if you wanted to watch them.
For my private viewing, it is. I mean, I saw that WCBS report a couple of years back, and what struck me, first of all, seeing it, it looked like a bomb went off. It literally looked like that. And then, as someone who's lived in Derby for 20 years, seeing that, oh wow, Derby Main Street looked much different than what I'm used to. Yeah, I did. That was all new to me.
So I would say, join us. It's the Volley Chief. It's available on all podcast platforms over the next couple of weeks as we continue the story and get into it with, we're obviously going to be interviewing my father, Tom Lenart Sr. He was one of the first ambulances on scene, and then he had to switch modes because he was a police officer in town and, become a cop again, if you will. And Then Mike Wittick. Mike was from the Storms. He was one of the members that was directly involved in the rescue with Mr. Ippolito. So I've got a few of the members lined up that we're going to sit down and talk to and hear their story of that day. So join us on this adventure. Eugene, I thank you for giving me a little bit of technical help here and, teaming up with me on this one.
My pleasure. Are you kidding?
Yeah. So stay tuned to the next episode and have a good night, everybody.